Once upon a time, on an island in the Aegean Sea, there was a deep cave where a small group of people lived. They were slaves, and not only were they prohibited from leaving the cave, but they were also tied hand and foot. Some high rocks, acting as a wall, prevented people from seeing what was beyond. They lived in the shadows, but every now and then a flickering light came on, and on the rocky walls of the cavern they saw moving shadows projected. The slaves believed that all that existed in the world was that cave, those shadows, and the flickering dim light. However, behind the wall was where the magic happened. There, other people were in charge every day of lighting a fire that emitted that light, and in front of the fire they placed figures of animals, people, and objects, moving them like puppets. This cast shadows on the rocks that obscured the slaves. Then one day, one of the slaves managed to untie himself and freed himself. He went through the wall and saw the puppets and the fire. He understood that what he had seen all his life growing up there had been only the shadow of the truth. But he did not stop there, and was emboldened to leave the cave. Upon reaching the end of the tunnel, he saw bright daylight, something he had never seen before, and it damaged his vision, preventing him from seeing the world. For a long time he refused to see, covering himself, looking for shadows, dark places, to feel safe in the known, to which he was accustomed. He could only see and understand shadows, so he began to follow them, looking at the ground, until he began to dare to see the objects from which the shadow was cast. He saw nature, the plants, the animals, the people, and understood that the puppets were not the truth. They were just a game, a simulation of this real world. But it would take him even longer to understand where the real light that allowed him to see everything came from. At night he dared to see the stars, then the moon, and one day he was ready to look at the sun. When he discovered the whole world, he decided to return to the cave to help his enslaved brothers and free them so that they could see the true. As he entered the tunnel, he realized that his vision was failing and he could not see things clearly because he had become accustomed to the light, and returning to the shadows was very difficult for him. Upon finding the others, he told them what he had discovered, but the other slaves saw how useless he had become, tripping over stones, not seeing the wall or them well, being quite clumsy. The other slaves believed that he had gone crazy and that he could not be like them. They began to fear him, calling him crazy, pushing him away, and even thinking about murdering him if his crazy ideas threatened the comfort of their lives. Thus the freed slave returns to the outside, frustrated by seeing that it was impossible to convince the others of what the truth was, that they lived in the shadows, and the shadows are not real. It is only absence of light, absence of consciousness. This myth, this story, narrates life itself between lights and shadows. All life and existence is a game of light and shadow. It becomes a problem when you take this game very seriously. The first particles that will generate energy will project light. The light particles will pass through all empty spaces, but will bounce back when encountering other particles in their path. This causes more particles to form atoms, and more atoms to generate molecules, and these in turn chemical compounds, chemical elements, matter, objects. It will be much more difficult for photons to pass through the bodies, bouncing off the surface of all the thousands of particles, which prevents the passage of light from the other side. This generates a void of light, which we call shadows. In mythological stories, light and shadow are enemies, but in reality, shadow is not a real or opposing force, but is simply light without being able to be projected. Absence of light. The opposite of light would be matter, which prevents its passage by being compressed more and more. But matter is nothing more than distorted light. Therefore, in history, it is the light itself that decides to transform and create the darkness of the density that will allow the existence of the shadow. In Latin, carrying the light is said lux ferro, which gave rise to the name bearer of the light, Lucifer. The story of Lucifer is better explained from another, not so mythological point of view. When the conscious light expands, he is able to manifest realities through energy. Energy then, in its positive and negative, begins to agglomerate the waves in the form of particles, and these into atoms that will give rise to the matter that you perceive with your senses. The same light bends in time and space to be able to live its ideas, feel its thoughts, experience its expressions. The distortion of light becomes the very mechanism of creation, but at the same time, a kind of trap for divine consciousness, since it begins to weave a labyrinthine framework from which it is very difficult to escape. Thus, one becomes a prisoner, a slave of one's own creation, being able to only perceive the distortions. That is when people begin to live deceived by their own psyche, their own soul and energy, from the subconscious and the unconscious, weaving an infinite and chaotic web, meaningless, without escape. That is the world of shadows. The very life you live based on beliefs, sensations, perspectives, and perceptions. You believe everything your senses tell you. You believe everything others tell you. You make it your truth, and you can only see the world with those eyes clouded by distortion and shadows. It is the subconscious that lights the fire every day, hidden behind the wall, bringing patterns to light. It is the unconscious that, without any idea of things, lets itself be carried away by the shadows and lives its life based on them. Well, in every step you take, your shadow is the only thing you have contact with.